Ladies and gentlemen, the moment we've all been waiting for. I just got lipstick on my book. Hey bestie, what's new with you? I finished A Court of Thorns and Roses, which I've been meaning to read forever. I was holding off because I knew it was going to be great, and I knew I was going to love it, and then I was going to be sad that it was over, but alas, we have read it. Spoiler alert, I did love it. It is over. I'm currently reading the rest of the series, and I'll let you know how that goes. But first, let's talk about this, and guess what, bestie? You're going to be so excited. I actually wrote down notes this time. Right? So, can you see that? That's so embarrassing. Anyway, so A Court of Thorns and Roses, if you aren't familiar, is by Sarah J. Maas. And this book is all over Book Talk. This is where I saw it. I saw it 100 times, and I said, all right already, I will read it. Calm yourself. I will read it. And you know, it was good. It was good. Not at all what I was expecting right off the bat. I don't really know what I was expecting, but we start off and we're in the woods, and I was like, the woods? What do you mean the woods? What? Anyway, we start off with Feyre, who is our main character. She's in her late teens, you know, like all of these characters always are. And the entire book is from her point of view, so there's no switching in this one. So we start off, she's in the woods, and she's hunting because her family has fallen from wealth, and so she has to be the one to go out and hunt everything because her sisters are kind of bitches and they don't want to do it. And so she's out there hunting, and she sees this deer, and she's like, ooh, I'm gonna shoot it. And she is gonna shoot the deer, and then there's this wolf that comes out, huge wolf, and she's like, is that a wolf or a fairy? IDK, I'll shoot it anyway. And so she shoots this wolf, and it's just sort of standing there, like it didn't try to get away or anything. She's like, oh, that's kind of weird. But then the wolf dies, and she's like, sick, got a huge wolf, I'm gonna skin it, and then I have this pelt, and I can sell it for money because you got to get that bag. She goes into town, and she sells the pelts, and there's this lady who's like, oh, I mess with the fairies, don't mess with the fairies, because there's this whole wall, and you can't go across the wall, and there's the fairies that hate the humans, and all that kind of stuff. So, we're in the town, she sells the pelts, and then she goes home, and she's like, tight, we got food, we got money, it's a good day. Her sisters are like, money please, and she's like, oh my god. So anyway, they go to bed, and then the next morning they wake up, and there is then like banging on the door, and they're like, huh? And this guy comes in, and he's a beast, and he's like yelling, he's like, oh my god, you killed him, who killed him, you're murderers. And she's like, it was me. And so he's like, oh my god, I could kill you right now, or I could take you back to fairyland and you'll have to live there with me forever. And she's like, option number 2. And so he takes her, she gets like magic, she ends up in this manor, and it's pretty, it's nice there. She's like, oh, where am I? And he's like, this is the spring court, and I'm Tamlin. And Tamlin, my guy. Anyway, so they're basically like alone there, and there's like, just like a couple fairies. We have Alis, who's her helper, who like almost a servant, but like they're in the manor. And Tamlin, he's got this mask on, and so does like everybody. And she's like, yo, what's up with the masks? And they're like, we can't take them off. And she's like, that's a little sus, but all right. And so she's like a painter, that's her whole thing. She's like, I love to paint, not like other girls. And so she like hasn't painted in forever and whatever. Anyway, she spends a lot of time there getting to know Tamlin, and then Lucian, who's his friend, I don't know. Yeah, Tamlin and Lucian, and she's sort of like getting to know them. She's sort of getting comfy there. She's still worried about her family, but Tamlin has assured her that like your family is totally fine. They're set to go. They have money. They don't remember why I took you. They think you're off visiting your aunt, and it's totally cool. And so she's finally getting comfy. She like starts painting. She's like, oh, this is kind of tight. And there's like these woods around because they're in the spring court. And there's all these woods, and they're like some like funky kind of like, they call them lesser fae, or like monsters that are in the forest. And she kind of like almost gets got by a couple different monsters, and he's like, you need to stay in the house, it's no good if you get to outside. And so Tamlin's kind of like boy. So he runs out and he's like killing all these monsters, and she's like, what's up with all this? And they're like, oh, there's this like blight on our nation, and it's like a curse, and that's all I can really tell you about it. But that's why the monsters are here, and that's why Tamlin's all angry all the time, and why we got these masks. So yeah, don't even really worry about that. She's like, I tight. So she ends up at one point, she like is in the woods. She wants to figure out a way that she can go home, like break the thing, because Tamlin's whole thing was like, oh, you have to come with me as retribution for killing my friend, and that's just the deal, and there's no loopholes or anything, so you have to live here. She's like, well, I want to find a loophole. And Lucian tells her about this creature called the Surreal, who like tells the truth and like knows all these things. And so if anybody would know a loophole, it would be the Surreal. So she decides she's gonna go trap the Surreal, and she goes and she does it, and it's talking to her, and it's like, yeah, there's like no way out of that. And she's like, ah, dang. And she's like, okay, thanks. And he's like, hey, and by the way, could you like stay close to the High Lord? That is your thing. Tamlin's the High Lord of the Spring Court. I forgot to say that. But she's like, okay, tight, will frickin' do. And so she's like, you know what, yeah, Tamlin's pretty cool. She's like sort of getting like the butterflies around him. She thinks he's sort of cool. And then there's this festival that's coming up that's called ACOMAF, and it's the fire night. And so basically they have this like huge festival and like have all these fires, and it's supposed to like help like good crop for the spring. So that's like the whole thing. And they're like, you need to stay inside, do not come out on ACOMAF. She's like, okay. But Feyre, you know, being the girl she is, she ain't gonna stay inside. So she ends up going to fire night, and while she's there, she's kind of like looking around. There's like all these fairies. She's like, okay, like this isn't so bad. Why couldn't I come to this? And these like three are kind of like, ooh, you lost BB. And she's like, oh. So these three are kind of ganging up on her, and she's getting a little nervous. And then all of a sudden, the most beautiful man she has ever seen steps in. And he's basically like, oh my god, hey, there you are, I've been looking for you. And all the rest of them are like, ooh, and they skedaddle real quick. She's like, okay, handsome stranger, thank you so much. And they kind of chit-chat, and then she like gets back to the house, and Lucian's like, oh my god, why did you leave? Oh my god, Tamlin's gonna be so mad. She's like, what's the big deal? And he's like, well, Tamlin has to do this, like, it's called the rite, and basically he turns into like big beastie boy, and then he's got to bang somebody. So there's all these people that are lined up there to like bang him, but he likes you, so he's gonna look for you, and now that your scent was there, he's gonna be all weird, but you don't want him to bang you right now, so like you stay in the house, and then yeah, he'll bang somebody else. She's like, oh. Anyway, she ends up in the middle of the night getting up to like go get a drink of water or snack or something, and Tamlin's like, hey girl, because he performed the rite, and then yeah, but he was like looking for Feyre the whole time, and so he like bites her on the neck, and then they're kind of maybe want to kiss a little bit, so they're kind of getting hot and heavy, but they kind of split that up real quick. And then after ACOMAF, the blight like just keeps getting worse and worse. There's all these monsters everywhere all the time. Tamlin's away a lot doing all this kind of stuff. Tamlin is basically like, I have to keep you away from Amarantha. She's this like terrible lady. We got to keep you away from her. She's like, oh, what? And they're like, no, you don't understand. We got to keep you away from her. And so then at one point, we have a visitor at the Spring Court, and it is Rhysand, who is the High King of the Night Court. And so he's kind of like, I'm a baddie bee, I'm a baddie bee. You know, he's kind of, you know, he's a pretty boy. He's like the most powerful High Lord ever, so people are very nervous around him. He's got lots of little ghoulies that he, you know, controls. And then he also can like go into your mind, and he could like destroy your mind, he could like read your thoughts, he do all this kind of stuff. So people are like very nervous around him. And so he shows up, and they're like, okay, Feyre, we have to hide you, like he can't see you. But he's like, something like, why you got 3 table settings there? What's that smell? Who's that? And so then they're like, oh, ha ha ha, yeah, this is Lucian's lover. And he's like, I don't buy that. I met you at Fire Night. So Reese is that boy toy that we saw at Fire Night. And Feyre recognizes him, and he's like, okay, whatever. And then he's like, what's your name? And then she lies. She's like, Claire better. Like, ha 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 ha. Ha 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 ha. And he knows that's not her name because he like went into her mind, but he's like, okay, Claire, okay. And he leaves, and they're like, oh my god, we have to get you out of here. She's like, what do you mean? It's because Reese is Amarantha's like whore. Can I say whore on here? Yeah, basically Amarantha's whore. So he has to do all her bidding. And so they're like, we love you, Feyre. We don't want you to get turned over to Amarantha, so you have to go back to your family. She's like, okay. So they take her back to the human world, and her family, they're like doing real well because Tamlin's been sending them that check. And they like don't remember. They're like, oh my god, how is the aunt? I didn't think you'd be home so soon. And all this stuff. And Nesta, who is, so we got Elaine and Nesta. Elaine is like the sweet one, and Nesta is like the fiery bitch. And so Nesta is like, I remember everything that happened. I remember when that monster took you. I remember that we're all just sitting here doing all this weird stuff. And what's up with that? And so Feyre ends up telling her everything. And long story short, Feyre ends up going back because like she would do anything for Tamlin. She's like, I need to be with him, whatever, because this blight is getting worse and people will know about it and all this stuff. So she goes back, and the manor has been ransacked. There's nobody there. It looks like it's been broken into, and she's like, where is everybody? And so she ends up running into Alis, who, like I said, remember, she was like her little servant buddy. And she's like, Alis, what happened? And they're like, okay, like Amarantha came and she took Tamlin, and there was this whole curse on Tamlin. You stupid girl, you could have broke it. Basically, like Amarantha has this thing like against humans, and like her lover was taken from her or fell in love with a human or something. And so then her curse, like she always wanted Tamlin, but Tamlin like did not want her. And so she like did this whole curse with their masks on, and like to break the curse, basically he had to fall in love with a human who had killed one of his own. So that's why he had like the wolves, like were, like the wolves were like fairies who were like going out trying to like get killed by a human so that he could like bring them and try to break the curse. And this curse has been going on. He had like 50 years to try to break the curse, and he did not do it. And so basically then Alis is like, girl, you could break this curse, or you can't break the curse anymore because the curse already happened. But she's like, okay, they are under the mountain, which is in the middle of Corinthian. And so she tells her where it is, and she's like, basically, girl, just listen. Like, go in there, and you gotta listen. You gotta remember stuff. So Feyre goes to face Amarantha, and the Adder finds her, who is like this creepy, I almost think of it as like, almost like a Dementor with wings is how I'm picturing it in my mind. So they go in there, and Amarantha's like, oh ho ho, who is this? And they look, and Claire Better, do you remember her? Yeah, she's a real person, and Claire Better is like nailed to the wall, like dead and nailed to the wall, like all cut up, all terrible. And Feyre's like, oh, that would have been me. That is no good. And so basically Tamlin is like all like chained up, not like chained up, but he's like by Amarantha's side, and he's like not really saying anything. And she's like, I just want Tamlin back. And she's like, no, and you're my prisoner, but I will let you go, and you can have Tamlin if you can, you know, face these 3 trials that I'm going to come up with. And they'll all be like a month apart, and you're going to like live here kind of as a slave until then. And you can either solve a riddle at any time, and you'll be, you know, everybody will be released immediately, or you do these 3 trials and then be released after. And so she's like, okay, I will do the 3 trials. She ends up saying her real name, and she does not know the answer to the riddle right away. So she gets kind of beat up pretty bad right then and there. And then she gets put in this cell. She wakes up, and then Lucian comes in, and he, you know, helps heal her nose and whatever. And then she's waiting around for her first trial. Basically the whole time she's like, Cinderella, Cinderella. And they're like, here's some lentils that we threw on the ground. Clean them up. Or here's some dirty water to wash the floor. And she's like, this blows. The first trial, She gets in there, she gets like dumped in this mud pit, and there's this giant freaking worm. Like, do you remember in SpongeBob, that like ginormous worm? Yeah, that's what I'm picturing in my head. And so she's like running around trying to escape this worm, and she ends up making this like bone trap. And so then the worm like falls into the bone trap, and he's all just, and she ends up getting a bone stuck through her arm. And so she's got this like broken dangling arm. And Rhysand was the only one who bet that she would make it out alive from the first trial. And so she gets like thrown back in her cage after the trial. She's all like, owie, my arm, ouchie, ouchie. And then Rhys comes into her cell, and he's like, ooh, that arm don't look so good. And she's like, yeah, it hurts real bad. And he's like, okay, I'll make a deal with you. I will heal your arm if you spend some time with me at the night court every month. And he's like, 2 weeks. And she's like, that is a freaking lot of time. Oh, why would I do that? And he's like, you want that arm to kill you? And she's like, good point. I probably should get this arm fixed. And so she agrees to it, but only for 1 week. So she says, okay, I'll come visit you at the night court 1 week every month, and you fix my arm. So he's like, boom, baby, deal. And he fixes her arm, and then she's got this like full tattoo, like all down her arm. She's got this like eye on her palm. And she's like, boy, hold up. I was not supposed to, we did not talk about a tattoo. And he's like, you never asked if you would have a full arm tattoo. She's like, oh. So now she's got this tattoo, and she's kind of like mentally linked with Rhys. Like, he can like send her thoughts, and like she can hear his thought, like not hear his thought. Like, he can like send her like thoughts, and like he can read her mind and stuff like that. So they're like connected through this bond, through this deal that they've made. So she got this big tattoo on her arm, and she's like, oh my god, no. And then after she has the big tattoo on her arm, these like 2 ladies come into her room, and they're like, we're getting you dressed and ready. She's like, for literally what? And they're like, don't even worry about it. And so they put her in this kind of like skimpy outfit, and then they like start painting all these like designs like all over her body. And she's like, weird, but okay. And she ends up getting taken down to this like party that's happening, because they like party all the time, party hard. And Rhys is there, and he's like, oh my god, you look so good. She's like, well, what's with all the paint? And he's like, I want to know if anybody lays their hands on you, because you're mine, and I don't want people to mess with my stuff. And she's like, oh, weird. And so he takes her down there, and then he gives her this fairy wine, and she's always been told her whole life, like, don't drink the fairy wine, don't do it. And she's like, what? And he's like, do it. So basically, like, when she's at these parties, it happens like every night. She gets all painted up, and then drinks the fairy wine. Basically, Rhys makes her like dance for him, and then like sit on his lap, and basically to like make Tamlin jealous, and yeah, who really knows what else. At the second trial, they're in another pit. Amarantha loves the pit, and so they're in this pit, and it's her, and then Lucien is on the other side of this like gate in between the pit, and there are these spikes like descending from the ceiling slowly. And there's this inscription written on the wall, but Farrah can't read because she's just, you know, a humble little lady. And so she can't read the inscription, which probably had like the key to like which lever she has to pull to stop the spikes from impaling them. And so there's these 3 levers, and she's like, girl, I don't know which one to pick. So she reaches out to grab the first one, and she has this like pain in her hand, the one that has the tattoo. And she's like, weird, but all right. She reaches for the second one. Ouchie, ouchie. And then she reaches for the third one, and it feels fine. And she's like, Rhys, are you helping me right now? And he's like, girl, don't do it, girl. I'm just thinking about it. I ain't gonna do it. And so she reaches, and she pulls the third lever, and it stops, and Amarantha's all like, and so then second trial, all good. So then after she pulls the correct lever, Rhys is in her head, and he's like, do not let Amarantha see you cry. You're going to count to 10. You're going to stare at her. Don't look at Tamlin. This is what you're going to do. This is how you're going to be a bad bitch. She's like, okay. At one of the parties, because the parties are still happening even after the second trial, at one of the parties, Tamlin and Farrah, like, somehow, like, have a minute together, and they are going over, and they're getting, like, hot and heavy, like, in a closet somewhere, and Rhys is like, hi. And so he interrupts it and is like, oh, naughty, naughty. And then he hears like Amarantha coming, and he like goes in, and he like gives her like a big smoochie, and she's like, ugh, disgusting. And then afterwards she realizes, she's like, oh, he did that because if Amarantha had come in and I was all mucked up with my paint and like Tamlin was in there, she would have known what was going on. She would have just like killed me or something. But because Rhys was there, she's like, ugh, matter of time. After that happens, Rhys is like, okay, like go back to your cell. I'm done with you for the night. And then he comes back in later and he's like, oh, this blows. She's like, well, why are you in here talking to me? And he's like, you know, I just need somebody to vent to. Shut your mouth. Like, just listen. So they're just chatting. So they kind of have a moment and she kind of realizes, she's like, hey, like Rhys is kind of like keeping me from falling apart. That's kind of tight of him. And then for the final trial, she gets into this room. There are a bunch of people with like bags over their heads. And Amarantha's like, okay, girl, okay. All you gotta do is you just gotta stab these people in the heart. No biggie. She's like, okay, like, So she does it. She's like stabbing these people and she gets to the last person. They take the bag off her head and it's Tamlin. And Feyre's like, what? Couldn't be. No, not Tamlin. So she's like trying to think because Alis was told her to listen. So she's like thinking and thinking and thinking. She's like, you know what? All the times that I've banged Tamlin, I've never heard a heartbeat. And everybody talks about, oh, you got a cold heart, heart of stone. And she's heard all these things about how Tamlin doesn't have a heart. Or like it's heart of stone. And so she's like, oh my God, his heart is made of stone. Which like, what? But anyway, so she's like, okay, if I stab him, he's not going to die. So she stabs him in the heart. And, you know, the knife tip does like a because he's got a stone heart. Amarantha goes absolutely ape shit. She's like, are you kidding me? You were supposed to fail these trials. And Feyre's like, okay, like, I won, let everybody go. And she's like, actually, no. I said I'd let them go, but not immediately. That's only if you solve the riddle. And she's like, oh my God. And she's like, you know what? I am gonna beat you up. And so she's like, basically trying to kill Feyre. She's beating her up, slamming on her. And Feyre's like, oh my God, the answer to the riddle is love. Aww. Feyre's getting absolutely slammed. Rhys is like losing it. He's like yelling her name and all this because they become kind of buddies. And so he's like, oh my God, Feyre. And Amarantha is like, and she breaks Feyre's spine. Feyre is now dead. But remember, she's got that bond with Rhys. So all of a sudden, she's like snapped into Rhys's mind. And so she can like see herself through his eyes. And he had tried to kill Amarantha. Like, he, like, took a knife and, like, tried to stab her. And she was like, oh, my God, you traitorous filth. She doesn't trust Rhys anymore. So Feyre watches herself through Rhys's eyes. Amarantha does end up getting killed by Tamlin? I don't know. Somebody kills Amarantha. So she's dead now. And Feyre is also dead. And so Feyre is dead on the floor. And they're like, oh, my God, what? And all of a sudden, all the High Lords are like, you know what? We'll do this for you, Tamlin, my guy. We will save her. So they all go up and they like put a little like drop of their power because all the High Lords have like a special power. Like Tamlin can shapeshift and Rhys has like the darkness, and so they all give her like a little drop of power, which like reincarnates her as a High Fae. She wakes up and then Amarantha's dead, and she, you know, is like High Fae, and they're like getting ready to go home, and then she like feels this tug of like, oh, I need to like go out to this balcony. And Rhys is there and he's like chatting with her and he's like, oh my God, I'm so excited to go home. I've been like trapped under the mountain for 50 years and wow, it's gonna be so good to like see my people and all this. And they're just started chatting, and then he kind of like looks at her and he's like, and he stumbles back and then he just disappears. And she's like, okay, bye Rhys. And then Tamlin's like, hey yo girl, let's go home. And the book ends with them getting ready to go back to the Spring Court. And that is A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. So I absolutely tore through this book. It was one that I stayed up until like 2 in the morning to finish. I think I read it in like 1, maybe 2 days. I would very highly recommend this one, bestie. In one sentence, basically, girl meets boy, boy is cursed, girl saves boy, meets handsome hunk along the way. I think that's pretty good. So yeah, so we end the book and Feyre's all reincarnated and we're going to the Spring Court. And then next up is this thickie. Also good. We'll talk about her later. So my next read is going to be A Court of Mist and Fury, also by Sarah J. Maas. And if you like this video, give it a like, give us a comment if you've read it or if you have something you'd like me to read next. And I will see you next time, besties. Happy reading.